Participation in clinical trials is essential because that is the only way we are ever going to make progress on these next steps. We are getting better treatments. We are getting closer and closer and closer to a cure that's available for everyone through clinical trials.
So hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Aaron Kowalski, CEO of Breakthrough T1D. Hopefully, most of you know us, but if you don't, we're an organization focused on accelerating life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and better treat T1D and its complications. Founded by two amazing T1D moms 56 years ago, really with the North Star being curing type 1. And here we are with Katy Beth, who is going to talk about that. My personal story is I was diagnosed at 13 with type 1 diabetes, and I have a younger brother who was actually diagnosed before me, Steve, when he was 3. And Katy Beth, it was great to meet you earlier this week. Thank you for taking the time today. Katy Beth Hand, who is a participant in the Eledon tegoprubart trial, which is generating a lot of amazing buzz. I'm really proud that Breakthrough T1D has been one of the big funders of this trial, early funder, and continues to do so. And our fund is invested in Eledon, and this is a high priority for us, the number one priority for us. So I really appreciate you, Katy Beth, taking the time to tell us a little more. I know you're telling this story because so many people are so interested. So maybe you could just start by talking about your T1D journey and how you got here.
Sure, yeah. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes back in 2013, in March of 2013. I was 26 years old, so a little bit older, although that's not that uncommon these days, right? Which is why we're Breakthrough T1D and not JDRF anymore. And so I was diagnosed at 26, did not see it coming. We had no family history, thought that I had the flu, went to the doctor, ended up in the ER in DKA, and was really given no hope. It was basically, this is it. This is what your life looks like now. And, best of luck to you. You're manually keeping yourself from dying every day and every night for the rest of your life. Good luck. So I really went through a period of grief through all of that. And went from being this young, carefree 26-year-old to suddenly being like, I've got to find a job with great insurance. So kind of had to rebuild who I was and what my outlook on life was. And through that process, became stronger and met a lot of other people that I absolutely love and respect that are dealing with this disease and thriving on a daily basis. And so the past 13 or so years, I have spent just a ton of time kind of immersing myself in this community, learning everything that I can, figuring out how best to care for myself, helping educate others. I feel like there is no disease out there with more misinformation than type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of my passion. That's what I do. That's been my journey over the past 13 years.
That's amazing. So as you know, we're in New Orleans this week. We have Breakthrough T1Ders, staff and volunteers from around the country and actually around the world here talking about how we can drive our mission forward. And I often, we talk about fundraising. We raise money to support trials like the trial you're in. We talk about advocacy, making sure there are pathways out to people with diabetes. We can't change people's lives until we get these products in our hands. But we also talk about clinical trial participation. And that's one of the kind of probably underappreciated ways T1Ders can make a difference. And you've done it. You went out of your way, you sought out these trials, and now you're benefiting. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you found the trial and your experience?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, and one of the questions I get asked a lot. So this is not actually the first. I'll say I've participated in other studies that were a lot less involved than the Eledon trial, which is what I'm in the middle of now. As a person living with type 1 diabetes, I was always doing research constantly over the years of what's the next big treatment, what's the next big thing, all of that. And so that is how I ended up finding out about the Eledon clinical trial. I had gone down the rabbit hole. I was looking at different clinical trials, and I can't remember exactly what website it was. It may have been the JDRF, now Breakthrough T1D website with the clinical trial tracker. I know that I've used that for several because it's easier to navigate than clinicaltrials.gov. That one, there's a lot of information and it's really hard. What I like about the trial tracker with Breakthrough T1D is you can kind of put in what you're looking for, what you have, what area you're in. You can filter it a little bit more than on a lot of these other websites. But I ended up, I've done several different studies. So I did a couple of studies where I shared my Dexcom information and food logs with researchers, just so, it's something I'm doing anyway, right? And it's something that they're using to track different patterns. I was part of the Dexcom 15-day clinical trial where they tested out those before launch. And then, of course, I ended up finding the Eledon clinical trial online, went down the rabbit hole, did a ton of my own research on that, and then decided to apply and see where it took me. And it was kind of a long process. It wasn't like they called me the next day and said, great, you're in, come on up. We can talk more about that if you want to. But participation in clinical trials is essential because that is the only way we are ever going to make progress on these next steps. We are getting better treatments. We are getting closer and closer and closer to a cure that's available for everyone through clinical trials. And so even if you're a person who can't do what I did and, put work on hold and fly back and forth to Chicago and all of those things, you can help by donating. You can help by doing some of these simpler studies. There are a lot of ways with clinical trials to get involved and support those. And so if that's not something you've ever really looked into, I would really encourage the listeners to do that.
Yeah, I'll really hammer that home for viewers that we have a part of our website that does allow you to type in your name and your zip code and the types of trials you're interested in. And we did this, as you mentioned, there's clinicaltrials.gov, which is more kind of geared towards medical professionals. This is more for the average type 1 person out in the community, which allows you the opportunity to do this across all different types of trials, whether it's treatment, preventing, and ultimately curing. So that's wonderful you did it. And now here you are. So maybe just before I get to my next question, a lot of people when I'm touring around and they're asking what does an islet transplant mean? What does it entail? And people's minds are always blown when I tell them it's essentially a tablespoonful of cells. And maybe can you just talk a little bit about what it was like getting the transplant? Because I think the other thing is people think you're getting cracked open. It's not that. Yeah. So maybe you could explain what it is.
You're dead on. So when people hear the word transplant, you're thinking kidney transplant, heart transplant, lung transplant. I am very thankful to say that that's not at all what an islet cell transplant is like. So if you have type 1 diabetes, your immune system has attacked your own islet cells. And those islet cells, there are several different hormones, but one of the ones that you lose is your beta cells. They make your insulin. And so that's what makes you have type 1 diabetes. So with an islet cell transplant, you actually get a set of islet cells, fresh islet cells, and it's like the easiest process in the world. And people don't believe me when I say that. If you've ever gotten a crown put on at the dentist, if you said you can get a crown put on or you can have another islet cell transplant, I would choose islet cell transplant all day long. So the process is really simple. They extract islets. They're in kind of a bag of fluid. Like you said, it's like a teaspoon of islets. And the way they do the transplant is they actually make a really small incision in between your ribs. And they use, like a radiologist surgeon uses technology to snake a tiny tube through the incision between your ribs through a portal vein into your liver. And let's talk about that for a minute. People try to correct me all the time because for a non-diabetic person, it is your pancreas that has your islet cells. But for a transplant, you're actually getting these put into your liver because your liver it's a cozy home for them. It has great blood supply, so they will thrive there. So they snake the tube into your liver, and then they kind of infuse. They bring the islet cells out of the IV bag, they put those into your liver, and then they snake the tube back out. And then the guy put a Band-Aid on me, the surgeon did, and then, sent me to recovery. The whole procedure was less than an hour, and I was back in my room. And so when you think islet cell transplant, it's really not the crazy, over-the-top, involved transplant process that most people think it is.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for the viewers to hear. I talk about it quite a bit, and just to nerd out on the science a little bit, given that is my background, I grew up as a scientist at Breakthrough T1D. The liver is right next to your pancreas, and your insulin flows. The first place it flows when your beta cells secrete insulin in the pancreas is into the liver. It's where you store sugar. It's where sugar comes from when you're exercising or just walking around. So, and people may say, well, why not put it in the pancreas? Pancreas is a very delicate gland, and you just don't want to mess around, and surgeons don't want to mess around with the pancreas. So that is where we're doing the most islet transplants. Some people will probably see that this company Sana, who's doing a gene-edited version of these cells, is doing it in the forearm right now. We are looking at other places, but I did want people to hear that the procedure right now, we expect in the future, will be an outpatient procedure and is not super intensive. So now you get the islet transplants, you come home, the islet transplant come home. Tell folks about like what the experience was as you kind of the cells started taking hold.
Yeah, so the way this trial works, you get your islet cell transplant, and then after you have your islet cells, so you notice the drop in it's like a radical correction of your glucose control, especially those first 24 hours. That is true. And then beyond that, over the course of, it takes islet cells about 3 months to really start like all become fully functional. So over the course of the next month in particular, but really the next 3 months, starts this process of working with the research team to start weaning off of your insulin. So exactly a week to the day after I had my islet cell transplant, my doctor, Dr. Wachowski, pulled me off basal insulin completely. I've not had any basal insulin since January 20th of 2026. So he pulled me off of that. And then over those next few weeks, it's really been the process of figuring out how, and it changes every day, right? Because the islet cells are ramping up, so your insulin needs are ramping down. So there's not like one time that you're like, well, this is your new, insulin carb ratio. It is a constantly changing process. You get monitored very closely. Dr. Wachowski has my Dexcom on his phone, and so he can look at any point and see exactly what my glucose is sitting at. One of the interesting pieces of this is I tell people I am still taking insulin right now because it's a protective insulin. So you don't want to stress out those islet cells and make them work really hard for those first 3 months. And so I'm trying to eat lower carb. I'm so glad I'm not with you in New Orleans, Aaron, because I would absolutely be pounding beignet right now. But you try to eat a little bit lower carb, and then I still take a few units of insulin before I eat and try to wait for those to kick in and then eat whatever I'm going to eat. The mistake I've made several times is taking a couple of units of insulin, not waiting long enough. Then I do have a little bit of a blood sugar spike that my islets pick up, not realizing there's already insulin on board, and then that can drop me low. So the whole process, every single day looks different, which every day with type 1 diabetes looks different anyway, but it has been a really cool process over the past, it's almost 6 weeks of slowly coming off of insulin after so many years of thinking I would always have to be on it.
How many units did you take before, and how many are you taking right now?
Oh gosh, I used to take about 25 or 30 units of long acting, and then I would take, just depending on the meal that I ate, I would take probably 6 to 10 units of insulin, every 3 or 4 times a day, depending on what and when I was eating. And so now for me to sit here and be like, I take 4 to 6 units of insulin a day total, no long acting insulin, just total throughout the day. It's such a difference already. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. So now you're taking 4 to 6 units a day. You told me you originally posted on Facebook so your grandmother could hear about this. You make a post, man, and tell me if that's true. But and then all of a sudden things go wow. Talk a little bit about this. It's been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on social media, since college, whatever, and never really thought much about it. And I had done a post. I had a mixed meal tolerance test a month out from transplant, and so I did a quick post update from Chicago that was like, I did my mixed meal tolerance test. This is how it went. Greetings from Chicago, islet cell transplant. Eledon trial, life's good. So I go to bed. And I wake up the next morning and millions of people have seen, liked, commented, messaged me, sent me friend requests, all of these different things. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did not expect that to happen. So I spent the next few days doing nothing but answering questions from people as they were sending them in real time. Yeah, it was a surreal experience for sure.
That's amazing. So you've been involved in Breakthrough T1D. I'm really proud. Obviously, I'm biased here as CEO of the organization, but my family's been involved since I was a teenager, and we always leaned in with the hope of curing this disease one day and supporting it. And you and I talked about the artificial pancreas, to the devices, the sensors, and how progress has helped people with type 1 a lot and made a big difference. Talk a little bit about your interaction with the organization, and you talked about the clinical trial tool, but other touch points you've had.
Yeah, so JDRF was around, and a group that I started kind of following and tracking and being a part of back not too long after I was diagnosed. And it gave me a lot of accurate information. It also gave me the ability to find events local to where I was. There's something about type 1 diabetes that being able to connect with another local face really makes all the difference. And so I've done several of the runs that they've done. I have a friend of mine trying to convince me to do the cycling tour that's coming up. You probably won't see me there, but we'll see. She's trying hard to get me in on that.
My brother's a coach.
Several things like that. And then most recently, I participated in the Breakthrough T1D Summit here in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is where I live. And so I participated in that and actually got invited to speak on one of the panels about clinical trials. And so through that, I've made tons of new connections, even within the Breakthrough T1D community right here where I live. And we have the Breakthrough T1D Gala that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. And so there are constantly all of these cool events. And I think one of my favorite things about attending a Breakthrough T1D event is going there and instantly having something in common with everybody in the room. I go to a lot of conferences for work. I speak at different things. There is no more instant connection, I think, than the connection between two people that have type 1 diabetes. There is a common, everyone has their diagnosis day story. Everyone has their struggles, and there's just so much instant connection. And I love that about the Breakthrough T1D community. And there's a ton of support as well.
That's awesome. I'm sitting across from some of the people who did the T1D Barbie, and we had this wonderful story at the conference yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, about a little girl who was a dancer and she was diagnosed and she felt different because she was wearing the devices. And then T1D Barbie came out and it was so meaningful. And you told me that you have a T1D Barbie.
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me about her, so I have her here. She's here.
I love it. Yeah.
So we have 4 kids. And one day last year, completely unprompted, we were out shopping in the toy section, of course. And my kids start screaming their heads off. So I come over and they're like, Mom, we found it. The diabetes Barbie. She's just like you. Wow. So we picked her up and we named her and we brought her home with us. And she, some families have Elf on the shelf. We have diabetes Barbie on the shelf. She bounces all over our house. My favorite thing, or the funniest thing my kids do, is when they make a mess, they'll have a bunch of, gummy wrappers or snack bar wrappers or crumbs somewhere. Instead of cleaning it, they will put the diabetes Barbie next to it. And then when I come in and I'm like, okay, who made this mess? They'll be like, it wasn't me, Mom. Diabetes Barbie had a low. She had to drink.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Oh my God.
Is the excuse in our house. So yeah, just making it's so cool. Even as an adult, right? Like I got diagnosed as an adult, but even as an adult, seeing representation of someone who, like Barbie, who has diabetes is huge. So of course, it's an incredible thing for kids living with the disease as well.
I'm going to come back to the tegoprubart trial, and this is a really as a scientist, an interesting story for us and Breakthrough T1D, because one of the things we see in T1D science is a lot of the drugs and therapies that are being developed out there actually can work in different diseases, and Eledon is focused on kidney transplant, which is great. And the team saw this as having the potential of being a better immunosuppressant for islet transplants. People in the community may know that islet transplants have been happening for a number of years, but they require these immunosuppressants. That's a trade-off. So you'll hear folks say, I've been cured, but I have some of the issues with these immunosuppressants. Tegoprubart has a much safer risk profile, not yet approved. The company is working on this, and that's part of our plan with this trial. But talk about, from your lens, as a participant, what you've seen and why you think it could be a good potential solution.
Yeah, I mean, you covered it really. So, like you said, islet cells aren't new, islet cell transplants, and a lot of people are surprised by that. I think it's just something that doesn't get talked about because there is such a trade-off, and they're relatively new, right? Like the last 20 years or so, but there's such a trade-off because up until now, you could have an islet cell transplant and it would cure your diabetes, but you would need to be on tegoprubart, or not tegoprubart, you would need to be on tacrolimus, and that's not a bad drug. It's saved tons and tons of lives, but it comes with a lot of negative side effects. It can cause kidney damage, it can cause some neurotoxicity, and over time, it can also become toxic to islet cells themselves, which are the very cell we're trying to protect. And so it kind of puts a limit on the range. Like if you're 40 years old, I'll be 40 this year, would I do an islet cell transplant and do tacrolimus? Probably, yeah. But if you're 4 years old, would you want to do an islet cell transplant? And so I think the excitement around this trial is really taking tegoprubart and replacing tacrolimus with the tego. And the tegoprubart does an even better job at protecting those islet cells. So that's incredible because the goal is to do an islet cell transplant and then have it last, right? Like we want to get longevity. You don't want to have to, their islet cell transplants are relatively easy, but you don't want to have one every few years. So the goal is to be able to create something that can protect those islet cells and give them longevity. And then the other cool thing about the tego is so far, there are no side effects. And so there's no like medically significant side effects as far as like kidney damage and toxicity and those types of things. But for a person living through this trial, it's significant because there are no side effects that I feel. My lab work is good, but I feel good. I don't have a headache. I'm not tired. I don't have a rash. I told you the other day, people always push me so hard but what about this? But what about this? There are not any side effects. And all of the tego patients would tell you the craziest part is I feel normal like I did before, except Aaron, I feel better because my glucose is in range all the time. So I feel better than I have in the last decade and a half because of that.
Well, that's amazing. It's really interesting. I've met a lot of islet recipients, so the traditional islet transplant recipients, and I've honestly never met one who said they would go back and not do it. And in the community, people don't appreciate that this has been a potential vehicle. It is limited. We should say to the audience that right now we're using what are called donor derived islets. So unfortunately, somebody died, donated their organs, and we isolate the islets from the pancreas of the donor. A goal of ours obviously is scalable, and people hear about the Vertex trial. You told me you also were looking at that as an option. And I think when we look into the future, and you'll often hear me say, there is no singular cure that's going to happen. It's going to be a series of curative therapies that will be for more and more people. Because even right now, we have donor-derived islets with traditional immunosuppression, moving towards donor-derived, maybe with a tegoprubart, stem cell-derived with tegoprubart or traditional. And I think ultimately where the holy grail is what we would call an immunoevasive cell that doesn't require any. But I think it's such a beautiful story that you're telling, which is the science is moving such that, I always call it kind of a balance. The risks of diabetes, people look at us and they're like, you look fine, but don't appreciate hypoglycemia, hyperglycemic driven complications, the mental burden, all the physical burden of what we do every day. And I think the more that you reduce that safety profile on the islet side, the more and more people are going to be able to benefit from these amazing curative therapies.
Yeah, so the cool thing about this is that we are actually living at a time, and you spoke to this. There's not like a one cure fix all. So diabetes is a disease of progression, right? And so there are treatments now for picking up antibodies before kids ever show symptoms of diabetes and trying to delay that. And so, do I think there will ever be like one pill that you take and it cures your diabetes and keeps you from ever getting it? Hopefully one day. I don't think I'll probably see that in my lifetime. But the crazy part about the time we are living in, and I feel so blessed by this, is that there are multiple pieces of the puzzle all moving together. And I always tell people when it comes to clinical trials, don't think about clinical trials like they are competitors. Think about them like they are collaborators. And so I'm very excited. I get messages all the time from people that are in the trial trying the pig islet cells. And I'm friends with a lady who's in a trial where they're putting islet cells into her eyeball, and she's just doing immunosuppression eyeball drops in her eye. All of these things will come together to create different pieces of this puzzle that we need. And so, the trial, the other thing about a clinical trial that I want people to understand is clinical trials are trying something new. And so I have people sometimes ask me like, well, why wouldn't you try it with stem cells? Why wouldn't you do this? So using the tegoprubart for this trial, that's the new piece, which means all the other pieces in the puzzle need to be things that are known. And what is known is cadaveric islet cells. Those are those donor-donated islet cells from deceased donors. So that's our control, right? We know how those react. We've seen what it looks like to transplant those. We've seen what it looks like to protect those with tacrolimus. So now when we use that with the trial drug, we have really clear data on any of these things that are vastly different. It's the tegoprubart. And that's why things like this are so, so incredibly important. It's the research piece of it. You can't try 15 new things at a time because you can't recreate it. You have no idea what actually made the difference. And so all of these different pieces that are coming out, it's important that we have access to these donor-derived islet cells because that's a key piece of this research. It's important that we're looking at stem cell derived islet cells grown in a lab because that's going to be a key piece in making transplants like mine something that can be scalable with the tegoprubart. So all of these things are moving into play. I read research yesterday about there's a new protein that they find in umbilical cords of babies that can identify very accurately whether or not they'll one day develop type 1 diabetes. Well, that's something we can use for the prevention side of things. And what does that look like? So the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, Erin, is the fact that we are living in a time when there is so much research and so many breakthroughs and so many good things happening, and they're all happening right here around us. It must be a crazy time to be the CEO of Breakthrough T1D. I would think.
It's a fun time. And I've said that my goal as CEO is to take off my pump and focus. I look forward to the future of Breakthrough T1D being more of an access organization than a research organization at some point, because we'll have curative therapies for the bulk of people and we'll be pushing to get them to people.
Right.
So, Katy, I completely understand why your social media is blowing up. You give our community so much hope. What's one thing that you would say, like, to the community about where you are right now?
Yeah, gosh. Well, I think one reason, so there's nothing special about me. Social media has blown up the last couple of months. So I want people to understand, number one, there's not anything special about me. I'm patient 1 of 12 in this trial. I think the difference is with a lot of clinical trials, you might read about the research or there's a news article published about it. And it will say, this clinical trial participant, or, in China, they've cured one person, and then you never hear anything else. And if I can say one thing about us as a community, it is that we are a very, very skeptical community, because we have been promised a cure and told just 5 years. I mean, how many times in your life have you been told just 5 years, Aaron? Like, that's the bread and butter we're given from diagnosis day. And so I think the reason that my story has kind of blown up, and some of the other participants in this trial that I'm in, is because it's something that we're talking about, and I'm able to be really honest with people on social media. And it's very different to read about a cool clinical breakthrough somewhere. It's so different when there's a face and what that looks like, and watching someone say, this is my life, this is what that looks like. So if I had a message to our type 1 diabetes community, it would be, I understand how many years we've been promised a cure, and I can't promise you that the cure will be here tomorrow or widely available tomorrow. But I genuinely, and I told you this the other day, Aaron, I genuinely believe that we are looking at the last generation of children that will have type 1 diabetes. I would not have said that 5 years ago. I don't think I'd have said that 3 years ago. And so the scientific breakthroughs that are happening all around us are all these key pieces of the puzzle that are falling into place. And I'm just excited because somehow by God's grace, I landed myself right in the middle of that.
No, we're really happy you did. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time. As I said, it gives me so much hope. I obviously truly believe, I can tell you this organization is going to do everything we can to make that happen sooner than later, as fast, accelerating life-changing breakthroughs. This is the ultimate life-changing breakthrough for T1D, is to take off your pump and not have to deal with it and go have a beignet and just walk away. So Katy Beth, thank you so much. Thanks for being involved with Breakthrough T1D. Thanks for your courage in participating in this trial, and thanks for taking the time with me.
Absolutely, Aaron. It's always great to catch up. Thank you for having me.